It's 8:49. I call this meeting to order. Bonjour tout le monde. I'd like to welcome everyone.
Good morning.
It's International Day to Eliminate Violence Against Women, and it's very apt that we're doing this study on women today. This is the 20th meeting of the Subcommittee of International Human Rights. We're meeting today in a hybrid format, pursuant to the order of June 22nd, 2002. We're meeting both here in person and on Zoom. For those attending by Zoom who are new to the committee, you can have interpretation through the globe icon on the bottom of your screen. I ask that you wait until you're recognized, and as you're given opening remarks and time for you to speak, when you have 1 minute, I'll give a hand signal by raising my hand like this for 1 and like this for 30 seconds. And then I'll lean in and allow you to conclude your 5 minutes. Today, we are pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and motion adopted on Friday, September 23rd, 2002. We're studying the rights and freedoms of women globally and on women in Afghanistan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. We have with us in this first panel 3 esteemed witnesses. First off, from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, Jacqueline O'Neill, the Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, who will be testifying first. And also with us is from Human Rights Watch, Frida Daif, the Canada Director, joining us by video conference, and also by video conference, the International Civil Society Action Network, Sanam Nagari Anderlini, the founder and chief executive officer. Without further ado, Ms. O'Neill in person.
Thank you, merci, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the committee for initiating this very important study. So to be a woman fighting for rights and peace has never been risk-free. I'll never forget about 15 years ago, a Kenyan politician telling me that when she went to campaign events, she wore 2 pairs of very tight jeans to prevent thugs associated with the opposition party from raping her at her own campaign events. Or a Colombian woman who told me just a few years ago that she refused an award from her own government for brokering a peace deal because she knew that the recognition could lead to credible death threats for her family. But now we have data showing that the risks facing women, human rights defenders, and peace builders are increasing. So last month, the UN Secretary General reported that they've, quote, increasingly been targeted with attacks that silence their advocacy and prevent them from participating in public life. He said, with respect to women's rights, we're going backwards and experiencing a reversal of generational gains. L'exemple le plus
Perhaps the most extreme example is the situation in Afghanistan, where the Taliban are attempting to completely erase women from public life, an approach that has been described by many activists as gender apartheid. We see attacks on peaceful women protesters in Iran and Sudan, as well as in Myanmar, where the army has killed hundreds of women protesters. We also see conflict-related sexual violence in Ethiopia, Haiti, and in the context of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Indigenous women who are climate activists have been murdered, and dangerous disinformation campaigns target women peacekeepers and human rights defenders. So why are these disturbing trends occurring? One of the main reasons is related to attacks on democracy itself. Authoritarian leaders do not want to be held accountable by their own people and often perceive women human rights and peace activists as a direct threat to their power. It is in their interest to silence them. The Government of Canada is deeply concerned and is reacting in a number of ways. Let me briefly describe how so, and I will be happy to elaborate on these in our discussion.
Is that women human rights defenders and peace builders face significant risks because of their work. Particularly when they seek funding, the burden should not be on them to prove that their work can be dangerous. Our programming support to women peace builders now includes specific funding related to safety, recognizing they must sometimes buy locks or surveillance cameras for their offices or undertake digital security training. Also, with civil society's input, we developed the Voices at Risk guidelines to give practical advice to Canadian diplomats to support human rights defenders. Deuxièmement, nous essayons.
Second, we are trying to secure increased funding for women's organizations led by women who are fighting authoritarianism and the rollback of women's rights. As part of an announcement made in October, we've invested considerably. We know it's not enough, and we're trying to increase the quantity, flexibility, and accessibility of the resources we offer.
To women human rights defenders and peace builders themselves to understand the changing nature of threats they're facing. So, for example, they tell us that they're often the subject of online abuse and threats, and we're learning that these threats made against women online are more likely than threats against men to translate into physical violence. In Moldova just a couple of weeks ago, I asked a journalist about threats made against her and her peers. She explained that as part of her team of 4 journalists, all of them had recently completed a study and an investigation on corruption within the government. All 4 of them received death threats, and the 2 women on the team had their photos and contact information posted across dozens of prostitution-related websites. Dialogue with Canada-based diaspora refugee and women human rights defenders and peace builders has also been essential to understand their unique needs while here in Canada. For example, some have shared that unlike many other refugees, they prefer not to be located in areas with significant diaspora populations from their home countries because that can increase their vulnerabilities. Some have also raised the need for greater collaboration and coordination among federal partners. Quatrièmement, le Canada
Fourth, Canada is making a deliberate effort to raise the visibility and awareness of this critical and increasingly threatened work carried out by women human rights and peace advocates, for example, in supporting their statements. And we are, fifthly, actively building formal and informal networks and coalitions to correct the false narrative that gender equality is a Western notion. And I will stop here, given we have little time, and I will be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you, Ms. O'Neill.
Frida Dave from Human Rights Watch for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson and honorable members of Parliament for inviting me to appear before this subcommittee. I'll start my remarks today by addressing Afghanistan, a situation that is devastatingly grim, especially for women and girls. Severe food insecurity and economic crisis and human rights abuses targeting women and girls have brought the country to the brink of humanitarian collapse, eroding decades of progress on development and gender equality. Over the past 15 months, the Taliban have effectively removed women from public life. They imposed a de facto ban on girls' secondary education and banned women from most forms of employment. A May order requires women to cover their faces whenever they're in public, leave home only when necessary, and imposes punishment for non-compliance on male family members, essentially compelling men to become the enforcers of Taliban rule on their own female relatives. The Taliban dismantled the system to respond to gender-based violence, created new barriers to women accessing healthcare, blocked women aid workers from doing their jobs, and attacked women's rights protesters with impunity. Thus far, the international response to this crisis has been deeply inadequate. While many countries have issued statements, expressed deep concern, and called on the Taliban to end their rights violations, concrete, coordinated, practical actions have been few and far between. We expect countries, especially those that have a feminist foreign policy like Canada, to be much more active in opposing Taliban violations. We ask these governments to coordinate closely with each other, use all mechanisms and measures at their disposal, including sanctions against Taliban leaders, and make the rights of Afghan women and girls a major priority in their foreign policy. Turning to Saudi Arabia, it's clear that the kingdom is not progressing on human rights despite promised reforms. The space for dissent has significantly shrunk, and new legislation has codified the abusive male guardianship of women, which essentially renders them permanent legal minors. In many ways, Saudi Arabia has become even more repressive. A case in point, in August, a Saudi appeals court dramatically increased the prison sentence of Salma El-Shahab, a doctoral student, from 6 to 34 years, based solely on her Twitter activity. The sentence is believed to be the longest ever imposed on a Saudi woman for peaceful online expression. Another example of these hollow reforms is when Saudi authorities released 3 prominent women's rights activists from prison last year. They were previously arrested for publicly supporting the very reforms Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says he's seeking to promote. While they're no longer behind bars, they remain banned from travel and are serving suspended sentences, allowing the authorities to return them to prison for any perceived criminal activity. Saudi authorities clearly feel empowered to continue to crush dissent, and Saudi women are among its primary targets. Canada should ensure that it promptly and publicly condemns these actions and rulings and decisions that further shrink public space.
Qui vont cibler les femmes iraniennes. Et pour terminer, l'Iran, il y a eu des manifestations qui ont commencé après le décès d'une jeune femme iranienne et kurde. Oh, excusez-moi, Monsieur le Président. Oh.
For me.
And I saw Mr. Brunel also
for me not to.
indicating that. How's Mr. Brunel was also indicating that? How is translation? Is it working better? It's working well now, Mr. Duceppe is saying, and Ms. McPherson, I'm sure you're also following along. Thank you for that, Ms. McPherson. We'll continue.
Thank you. While protests began as a response to Mahsa Amini's death and the oppressive hijab laws, they've transformed into broad-based grievances against repressive, unrepresentative, and corrupt ruling authorities. Iranian authorities have ruthlessly cracked down on these protests with excessive and lethal force. We should remember that 1 month before Mahsa's death, on August 15th, a new presidential decree sanctioned women for showing their hair on social media, with female government employees facing dismissal from their jobs if they have profile pictures without their hijab. The head of the morality police also announced plans to enforce dress codes through digital surveillance of public spaces. Canada has shown strong leadership in response to the Iran crisis. Just yesterday, Canada supported a resolution at the UN Human Rights Council establishing a fact-finding mission with a mandate to investigate alleged human rights violations related to these protests. The government has also imposed a series of widespread targeted sanctions on Iranian officials. While we support at Human Rights Watch measures like targeted sanctions on those responsible for serious human rights violations, we actively encourage states like Canada to do their due diligence. For anything beyond individual designations, we encourage Canada to consult with experts and those who can help assess the potential unintended harm on civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Daif. And now we'll continue with Sanam Naragahi Anderlini, please, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. First, they closed the schools, then they stopped women going to work. Then they came to put the ban on women going to parks. And the latest news from Afghanistan is that women aren't allowed to buy SIM cards. This is the Afghanistan of 2022. Could the Taliban takeover have been prevented at the negotiations in Doha? The answer to that question is to ask you, if Afghan women peace builders and activists, women's youth delegations, and representatives from minorities had been present as delegations in those talks, would the outcomes have been the same? Would Mr. Khalilzad, the US envoy, have been able to agree the release of 5,000 Taliban prisoners, even as the Taliban was bombing maternity clinics and schools? Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. My name is Sanam Naragi Anderlini, I'm the founder and CEO of ICANN, and we specialize in the practice of inclusive and gender-responsive peacemaking and prevention of violent extremism. We spearhead the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, WASL, which is an alliance of locally rooted, globally connected, independent, women-led peacebuilding organizations in 40 countries affected by fragility, violence, and closing political space. And we're grateful to the Government of Canada for their support to us, including for ICANN's Innovative Peace Fund and She Builds Peace campaigns, which to date have dispersed $6.9 million to over 60 countries in 31 countries, 60 organizations in 31 countries, with grants ranging from $200 to $100,000. I share this with you because the work that is happening on the ground at the front lines of countries affected by conflict and violence is often invisible. It is the work of women. It is not behind the headlines. They are ahead of the headlines. And the work that we at ICANN have done over the last few years is to provide the bridge between those local activists and the international community, and we couldn't have done it without your help. That said, the situation on the ground is bleak, and we have to be very sober about what we're facing. As 2022 draws to a close, women peacebuilders are finding themselves in the center of a complex web of intersecting and escalating crises. As we celebrate and draw attention to the women of Iran, and as an Iranian by heritage, I find it extremely moving to see how the world is supporting the women of Iran. I'm struck by how the Afghan women are still left behind. As we watch what is happening in Ukraine and provide the humanitarian support needed to Ukraine, my colleagues in Yemen, Syria, and elsewhere where wars have continued to wage are still struggling. And the Ukraine war and the shifting of finances and attention is impacting women in other places and other contexts. We cannot forget them. We cannot forget that there's a world beyond our own borders and beyond our own regional interests. In terms of the information I wanted to share with you today, I wanted to focus on what women peacebuilders in my network are saying now about the issues that they're facing, the conflict, the crises, the climate change crises, things like floods and so forth, and their experiences from COVID. What we saw happen during the COVID crisis was that the world forgot the people at the front lines of war and fragility. When the WHO issued orders to wash our hands with soap and water, my colleagues in Cameroon and Somalia and Yemen were saying, we don't have soap and we don't have water. And what we saw happen was that women became self-reliant. They shared information across our WhatsApp groups about how to make soap from natural products and how to make hand sanitizers. We shared information from the ICANN side from what was coming from the American CDC and elsewhere. And what we realized is that the global solidarity and connectivity, the ecosystem we have, is essential for the work and survival of women peacebuilders and the communities that they're helping out there. We also saw that it is women peacebuilders who draw on the reserve of trust that they have in their communities to actually provide services. So when we talk about the triple nexus of humanitarian development and peacebuilding support, it's women on the ground who are doing that. And peacebuilding these days cannot be done if you're struggling to have water or if you're dealing with a drought or a flood. These things go together, and the women at the front lines are actually delivering these services. They are, as my colleague Ambassador O'Neill mentioned, at incredible risk. It is lonely work. Peace work is not easy. In polarized societies, when communities are polarized, whether online or in real life, to be the bridge, to try and be the interlocutors, to try and find a mediated space in the middle means that your life is at risk and your family is often at risk. And we're seeing more and more how women are doing their advocacy through public campaigns, through our She Builds Peace campaign that Canada again has been supporting. We are reaching deep into societies, and we're making the idea of being an activist for peace and equality and pluralism and recognition for peace work, something that many ordinary people want to participate in, young people especially. At a time when the world is having so many difficulties, when the UN is struggling to raise the money for the humanitarian emergencies that it already has. It can't even raise a quarter of what it needs. These women and the activists on the ground who are running to protect their communities, who are running to take on the responsibility to protect, they are the actors that are there doing so non-violently. They are essential, and we need to support them. We need to foster the ecosystem, and none of us can do this alone. So
thank you.
It is with this, thank you. It is with this message that I want to come to you to ensure that the activists that are risking their lives are getting the support that they need, and that Canada and other countries are practicing their own values by making sure that you are taking a gendered responsive approach.
Thank you. And now we're going to go into questions and answers. We'll give each member in the first round 6 minutes so we can get to a brief second round. So we'll start off with Mr. Versen for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. One of the things that I'm interested in knowing about, and I have my intuition on this, but something tangible would be helpful. As and you in all of your organizations have probably done work in this area. It's just the trend lines on some of these things. Like, it feels to me that this is it's all getting worse. And I was just wondering if you can point us to a particular article, particular study, probably work that you're doing that gives us a trend line. Is there a bright spot in the world? Like, it doesn't even feel like it feels everywhere is getting worse. I follow a lot of like the religious freedom indexes from around the world, and they note that everywhere out of 200 countries, everywhere has either stayed the same or gotten worse. There isn't improvement out of 200 countries. So I'll start with the Human Rights Watch Canada organization. Could you give us a bit of a sense of the trend lines on the work that you do?
Thank you so much for the question. I mean, what we're seeing in terms of trends, while we're not kind of documenting it very closely, is the more that there is a sort of rapprochement with repressive states, whether that is Saudi Arabia, like we've seen just recently with the Biden administration, or other states that are allowed to kind of use large-scale summits, bilateral meetings, large sporting events as a way to kind of perform a kind of image laundering and attempt to kind of hide their repression. The more that states kind of agree to that, don't call for accountability, don't criticize their repression and, against women and against all human rights advocates, we see an increase in impunity in terms of their actions. And so I think that's why we're consistently calling for states to, every time there is a women's rights activist who is detained, including in states that are allies to Canada, this needs to be, called out very publicly, because what we see is a sort of normalization of these practices, a kind of return to business as usual with repressive states that are allies or where there are strong economic interests. And then we see the trend, unfortunately, increasingly deteriorating for women and for civil society writ large.
I can. Did you have?
Thank you. Just a couple of things. So we know from studies that have been done that today only 3% of the world's population live in countries with open conditions for civil society action, and that generally global peacefulness has been declining for 11 of the past 14 years. So that is a trend line that is coming from the annual terrorism study and so forth. And I wanted to echo my colleague from Human Rights Watch about the double standards that we see, that we don't criticize, say, what's happening in Saudi Arabia or what is happening by Israel, by activism in Palestine, but we do criticize countries that are not necessarily allies of the West, or we ignore countries. What is happening in India right now in terms of the Muslim population, there are severe early warning signs. And the question is, what is the leverage that countries like Canada have. What we've seen in the case of Iran and Syria and elsewhere is that the blanket sanctions that affect the large swathe of the population actually embolden the hardliners and may have a tremendously detrimental impact on civil society and ordinary civilians. And so we need to make sure that we're not doing harm. We're not adding harm. And targeted sanctions, like the ones that you've just introduced in the case of Iran, are much better in terms of ensuring that the public hears what you're against and what you're for. But we've done a lot of harm to the Syrian population or to the Iranian population with the past blanket sanctions, and it's very hard to undo that kind of harm. Happy to answer more.
Just you mentioned the terrorism list. Do you know of an organization that kind of carries out its kind of work to kind of rank countries, a list of this? So I know in the religious freedom realm there's a number of organizations that spend a lot of time ranking countries for religious freedom. Is there a list that you use for this kind of work, with the work that you're doing?
There is the global terrorism index and the peace index that are produced, and I can certainly share the details of the organization that provides that kind of ranking. It's an annual study that comes out that we draw on.
It also sounds like you're recommending to continue to use and maybe increase the use of the Magnitsky sanctions process.
As I say, sanctions, anything that can be specific and targeted to individuals and their ecosystem of friends and family and so forth, I think that's the direction to go. The types of sanctions that we've had historically, that even if they don't, for example, you have banking sanctions that were not meant to affect civilians. But the fact of the matter is that it has a chilling effect. So ordinary Iranians, even ordinary asylees that come abroad and they try to open a bank account can't do so because banks are terrified of doing so. Right now, there is a real demand for increasing the connectivity, the internet connectivity, and technology companies getting involved. But if they're not given strong guarantees that about being able to not face penalties. It's one thing to say, oh, yes, come and set up the companies. But if they're not given guarantees that they're not going to be penalized later on, companies are not going to take the risk. So it really needs to be very, very tailored and targeted. And the private sector, banking, et cetera, if these companies need to be given reassurances that where and how the sanctions rules are drawn.
Thank you, and we'll continue to our next witness. Ms. Vanderbilt, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think it's very noteworthy that we're meeting here today on the beginning of the 16 days of activism against violence against women. And I'd like to address my first question to Ambassador O'Neill. I was glad to see that you, in your remarks, equated the decline and backsliding and threats to democracy with the threats and the violence, the increasing violence against women. Because when we're seeing right now in the world, the polarization is no longer left and right. The polarization is between authoritarianism, tyranny, and democracy, and along with that, the values of democracy, including gender equality, pluralism, diversity. So what I'd like to ask you is a little bit about that, about the fact that right now we're seeing a perfect storm between COVID, climate emergencies, and conflict, increasing conflict, which is really causing the women of the world to be the ones suffering the most. But at the same time, we're seeing an increase in gender conservatism. And that's not just happening in authoritarian countries. We see it south of the border in the rollback of important hard-fought rights of women over their own bodies. And in this context, if you could tell us a little bit about the need for global networks? How important is it that when women's voices are being silenced in one country, that women in other countries are able to amplify, draw attention, and even in so doing, provide safety for those that are on the ground fighting? But the other question I have comes from our previous study we did in a previous parliament in this committee on women human rights defenders. And one of our recommendations at that time was that Canada create a human rights defenders immigration stream. Because what we were hearing is when things go bad, they go bad quickly. Yesterday, I was at a Dignity Network event where I heard from a transgender woman living in a country where the legal structures are not helpful, and she said, well, when it happens, I need to get out in 3 hours. But they don't want to leave. It's not immigration. It's not refugee. These are people who want to return, want to keep fighting for their country. They just need a temporary asylum to be able to get out when it's hot and then be able to go back when it's safer. And I wonder, after that, the Government of Canada did create a human rights defenders stream, 250. I think we all agree we need more than that. But would you give some advice about how we could tailor that so that it is more rapid, so that it is more reflective of the realities of human rights defenders on the ground, and also maybe elaborate a little bit about how Canada could more readily foster global networks, even amongst parliamentarians, that would allow for us to be able to amplify the voices and make sure that the women that are really fighting on the front lines are fully supported by the international community.
Sure. So one of the reasons I think this study, and I'm so happy that this committee has taken this up, is that we have to recognize that these attacks on gender equality and on women's rights are not haphazard. To the previous member's question about data and trends, there are absolute trends, and there's an absolutely concerted and organized opposition to women's rights. And so we have to be as organized and concerted and strategic as those who are opposing us. I think we have to do that in a number of different ways. So to dial back to the start of your question related to democracy and authoritarianism, and again, maybe to the previous member's question, that's one of the key indices that we have to look at is repression. And the silencing of voices, and women in civil society's voices tend to be the first to be silenced. We're seeing what some have called an epidemic of coups around the world. So often military takeovers of government. Again, deep forms of suppression. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but whereas we'd seen a handful in the previous 20, 30 years, we're now seeing triple, 4 times the number of coups in countries. So we're seeing really dramatic declines on those fronts. And we're also seeing very intentional attacks on gender equality by countries that are working together, Russia and China in particular. They're doing this at institutional levels. So at the United Nations, for example, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, the African Union, we're seeing countries deliberately and often subtly try to roll back gains that we've achieved. So a colleague of mine said, I think of it, we used to be pushing a boulder up the hill. Now we're just trying to keep the boulder in place. So things like the rights of civil society and women activists to address the forums directly, for them to hear from them as opposed to just through government representatives, or to recognize the role of civil society in partnering with government. We're getting subtle rollback on these things at an institutional level. So the networks that you mentioned are exceptionally important so that we can identify these tactics and then anticipate them and work against them. That happens also at an individual level. So you referenced the pandemic has been something that's been really exacerbating these problems. First of all, as you all know very well, people couldn't meet in person. They had to take a lot of their work online, and that created massive opportunities for state surveillance of human rights activists and organizers. So again, we need to think about networks to be able to provide security for people differently. I commend the committee and the work of committees in doing things like recommending a dedicated stream for human rights defenders, which, as you know, translated into very specific action. I'm really proud that we have that, and as you said, want to keep growing that. And as we mentioned, there are very specific needs that we understand by listening to activists. So many human rights defenders and women peace builders, as you said, say, I'm not seeking permanent status. I need to be able to escape while I manage the risks. And then my ultimate goal, of course, is to go back. So that's not my barrier to begin with. As I mentioned, some people say, I don't want to go to a place where there's a concentration of people from my own country because I have to lay low. So it exposes me to different risks. So I might have different needs for supports. We have to be collecting gender disaggregated data on all of these applications and resettlements to make sure that women and men equally understand the opportunities that face them. And then the 250 number, of course, includes family members. So that adds up very, very quickly.
On that note of disaggregated data, we'll conclude this round and continue on to Monsieur Brunel Duceppe.
You have 6 minutes, Mr. Brunel Duceppe. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being with us today for this highly important study. I will move quickly. I was Vice President of the Special Committee on Afghanistan, so let me begin by discussing that country. Several NGOs came to see me in private, Canadian ones, to tell me that the criminal code, the Canadian criminal code, kept them from carrying out their work in Afghanistan. We saw the 2615 UN resolution in that regard that Canada never followed up on. In July, everyone said they agreed. Madame Joly, Mr. Sajjan, and so on, they said that changes would come in September. So far, Ms. O'Neill, have you seen a change in the criminal code that supports NGOs? No. Would you like a change? I would like to ensure that more Canadian groups are able to work in Canada, but are you aware that there are some NGOs unable to work in Afghanistan because they're afraid of being taken to court due to the criminal code? Yes, I'm aware of that. Now, I would like to speak to Human Rights Watch. Ms. Deef, are you aware of the situation, the fact that Canadian NGOs can't carry out their work because they are afraid that they would be charged under the Canadian Criminal Code?
As well, at Human Rights Watch.
And what effect does this have on Afghani women right now, this impossibility that NGOs carry out their work there?
Or civil society organizations in Afghanistan, women's NGOs in Afghanistan, the situation is incredibly bleak. And so it's really important for states to remove any types of additional obstacles that they may face.
May I add to that?
Easy.
Please.
Yes. So at ICANN, because of the funding that we receive from different countries, we have been, and from private sources, we have been able to get money into the country since September 2000. We were getting money in before, including Canadian support, but we've been getting money in since September 2021. And it really would make a difference to have consistency. So, for example, we can't use Canadian grants to pay salaries to our colleagues that are on the ground. These kinds of things make a tremendous difference. In terms of the rapid response issues, we do rapid response. We've been helping people get out. What we find across countries is that the foreign ministry that knows us will take referrals from us, but it's immigration that drops the ball across many countries. The only country that has been effective in doing the support with resettlement in a consistent way for women is Germany right now. And I would so this is very important. And going back to the question of networks, this is exactly why we have the networks that we do, because at ICANN we can do things, we have access, we can help our partners in many different ways, and we are not politically bound by the limits that a UN agency might have. We have direct access to bilateral donors and to the partners. So, and we don't have the bureaucracy. So we're able to get small amounts of money into people and assist in terms of protection and evacuation, but also protection on the ground. And we have a big protection guidance framework that we'd be happy to share with you. That's very detailed in terms of the kinds of support that governments can provide. Thank you.
Oui, on aimerait bien avoir.
Yes, we would like to get our hands on that. Would you please submit it to the committee? Very interesting for all of us. So, Ms. Deef, Human Rights Watch. I receive a number of calls from many organizations representing, for example, religious minorities in Iran and Afghanistan. And I am told that taking the Hazarats in Afghanistan, women's situation there, and that's what we're here to study, women's situation in those three countries. So could you give us more details about what's going on with minorities, religious minority women in those countries?
for the question. I mean, the situation of the Hazara minority is something that is very concerning to Human Rights Watch. We've documented a number of abuses. I mean, as you've seen in September, there was a suicide attack on ethnic Hazara students in Kabul that sparked, protests by women and girls across the province. The attack took place as, female students sat for a university examination. It claimed the lives of 53 students, most of them girls and young women, and injured about 110. So, this is something that, is adds to the overall very grim picture that we're seeing in Afghanistan in terms of the specific targeting and impact of Taliban rule on ethnic minorities and women in particular within them.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Perhaps you could shed some light, Ms. Narage Anderlini. Excuse me if I've mispronounced that. We have some point of view here from Canada on Iran. We're looking at Iran, and we have the impression that Iranian women are being supported by Iranian men. But looking at what's going on in Afghanistan, it's as though men don't dare speak up because they could be imprisoned. Saudi Arabia, we're told that men appreciate the situation there, don't want to support women. 30 seconds only. So have I got the right view of that, by the way?
So, yes, first of all, men are supporting women in Iran, and it's not the first women revolution in the world. It is the first revolution where the clarion call for women's rights is unifying everybody, and it's taken 43 years, 3 generations of women's resistance to get men to stand alongside with them. So this is why it's so important, and this is why, in many ways, women in the region are watching and very, very supportive, but governments in the region are very wary of what's happening in Iran as well, because the dynamics of having a women's rights call and uprising is threatening to others, including probably Saudi Arabia and elsewhere.
Thank you. And we'll continue for 6
Merci.
minutes.
Thank you.
Pearson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. My goodness, what an interesting panel on, as everyone has mentioned, on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Ms. Nagarani Anderlini, I know the other 2 witnesses very well and consider them like leaders in this work, and your testimony has been such that I'm certainly adding you to that list of these powerhouse women who are fighting for women's rights around the world. So thank you all very much for doing that. I want to follow up a little bit very briefly on what my colleague from the bloc had brought up. We do look at the fact that Canada cannot work in Afghanistan the way that we should because we don't have that humanitarian carve-out. And there are implications on that. And one of my big worries is that if we aren't careful, if we are not thoughtful and I guess looking down the road with regards to Iran, is there the potential that if we were to, for example, declare the IRGC a terrorist organization, would that give us the same implications in Iran that our civil society, the groups would not be able to work with civil society in Iran, and that would limit what Canada could do because we don't have that humanitarian carve-out in our criminal code? Ms. Anderlini, if I could ask you.
Thank you. I mean, the sanctions in Iran are so profound right now, and the crackdown from the state systematically, that the idea of, sort of civil society organizations per se is itself very different. That said, absolutely, carve-outs for humanitarian, civic action, et cetera, should be there. Carve-outs for ordinary people to send stipends to their family members should be there. It is almost impossible to try and get resources to ordinary people, including, by the way, to Afghans who are passing through, because what we're seeing is Afghans, for example, in our network, they get verified by Germany, but they need to come to Iran or Pakistan to get their visas at the embassies there. So it's really important to have the means and the measures for people to be able to pass through, and the embassy presence and so forth is also really, really critical for other reasons. But humanitarian carve-outs are absolutely, absolutely critical. We can't get money for charities for kids with cancer or orphans and, things like that each time. It's meant to be possible, but it's been very, very hard. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, and of course, the goal of all governments should be to be punitive towards the terrorists and the murderers who are in the leadership of the IRGC, and not to hurt regular Iranian citizens. And I think we've seen in the past that the Canadian community has not done a good job of that. So we have to be very, very cautious of how we go forward with that. Thank you for that. Ambassador O'Neill, of course, always lovely to see you. Thank you so much for bringing your expertise here today. You spoke a little bit about the online threats and what that means to women around the world. Could you expand on what Canada could do, how Canada could work with other countries, work with our allies to limit the impacts of those online threats against women rights defenders?
Sure, thanks so much. So a few different things. One, we can learn from other countries and how they are approaching this as it relates to programming. So I mentioned we've included now budget lines for digital security for women peace builders we're supporting. I think we can continue to share and learn from other countries of how they're doing that better. We have been working within different fora. For example, the Organization of American States now has a cybersecurity program, and Canada funded a free online course on cybersecurity and gender. So within various multilateral institutions to try to raise the fact and keep the attention on focus on women. We have a Women in Cyber Fellowship, a few different things. And then we also just joined, and I think this is an area for increased attention and including hopefully at a parliamentary level as well, something called the Global Partnership for Action on Gender-Based Online Harassment and Abuse. And so that's recognition that we have to work internationally to identify standards, to identify good practices. We also have a massive dearth of research in this area about what actually works, what works vis-a-vis IT companies and tech companies, what role they have to play, what role legislation has to play, and then specifically what governments can do.
Mm-hmm, thank you. And I'll just finish with you, Ms. Deef, if I could. I'm constantly aware that we pick and choose human rights in this country and in this world. We choose which countries to prioritize. It's often based on our trade relationships. It's often based with our geopolitical location. How do we stop doing that? How do we work with the Canadian government, with our allies, with other governments to ensure that human rights are protected regardless of where they are happening? When we should have been calling for the protection of women's rights in Iran before what's happening in Iran is occurring. We should have been doing that beforehand, and we weren't. What can we do to make sure that happens going forward?
Within a minute.
Right. Thank you for that question. I mean, I know Ambassador O'Neill mentioned the Voices Under Threat guidelines that are, meant to be implemented by Canadian missions all over the world. They have, very clear recommendations around, ambassadors requesting for prison visits of, human rights defenders, women's rights defenders that have been detained, calling on the government to observe, asking the government to observe trials of human rights defenders, et cetera, even when countries are unlikely to grant a Canadian ambassador that request. We should be making that request in order to signal our interest in human rights in the cases of specific human rights defenders. What's missing here really is, a sort of review of how actively our ambassadors are using those guidelines, those Voices Under Threat guidelines. How actively are they using it specifically in countries with very strong bilateral trade relationships? I think of Egypt, I think of Israel. Have they, when was the last time these ambassadors requested to meet with a human rights defender detained or observe a trial? And so there's really a question here of implementation that's the problem. And then, as mentioned earlier around... And
we'll continue on. I apologize, Ms. Deef. We'll continue on to our next very tight round of 2 minutes. Mr. Abul Taif, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. I will have a quick question to Ms. O'Neill. The question is, why leaders of countries with human rights violations insist on holding back women who could make a greater contribution to the well-being of their nation, and why those leaders are so unconcerned about the world opinion. They seem to, as time goes, they're less concerned as we move forward, which is very concerning on a human rights side and a women's rights side. So I would love an opinion of yours in a very short time. Thank you.
My very brief opinion on that broad question is that they're afraid of being held accountable by their own people. And they've got power that is tightly held, and that introducing more voices leads to greater accountability, which leads to greater transparency, and that is threatening to them. Why they're not feeling pressure? I think they're feeling pressure from some and reinforcement and tangible support from others who share their worldview and desire. And to the earlier point about networks, they are coordinated and mutually reinforcing. And so a lot of authoritarian governments are actually right now reinforcing each other and providing an alternative form of peer pressure that is actually reinforcing this type of behavior.
Madame Daif, would you like to add to this?
In less than 30 seconds.
No, I mean, I think that was adequately covered by the ambassador. Thank you.
May I add a point?
Yes.
Just very quickly, even the pressure that comes from countries that claim to care comes in siloed ways. It doesn't come in the high security spaces or it comes in the women's spaces. So it's like parallel universes that are existing.
On that note,
and we
we'll
need to combine
conclude
those.
this round, and we'll continue to Mr. Assassi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses we have. If I could start off with the ambassador. Thank you very much for your remarks. It was nice to see that you were specifically talking about women leaders who are now refugees. Specifically, we see a lot of Afghan leaders, a lot of Iranian women leaders. Apart from the stream that was mentioned earlier for human rights defenders, are there other means by which your office is trying to assist these women leaders? And do you take an active interest in identifying them and assisting them to come to Canada?
Absolutely. I think the primary role that my office can play in this is listening to them while here, especially about their priorities as it relates to political processes and security processes. So, for example, with Afghans, I've met with a number of Afghan networks of women in Canada that includes many, many new refugees, and recognizing that we have an incredible resource now of many Afghan women who have thoughts, priorities, et cetera. So I know you want to move on time, and I'll leave it there, but that is a key role, is actually listening to them while they're here to inform our government policy.
Thank you very much. If I could now turn to Ms. Deif. You talked about Saudi Arabia and how we are seeing a lot of hollow reforms, and we're seeing a lot of image laundering. Could you provide us an update on the case of Ms. Loujain Hathloul, who has been such an inspiration for her leadership, but we're not hearing much about her fate. So if you could provide us an update on her specific case.
Just a brief comment within 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So Loujain was one of the three Saudi women's rights activists that I mentioned in my earlier remarks, that while released from detention, she continues to face a travel ban and so can't leave the country. And so this is something, those types of travel bans are often used. So what governments will do is try and get praise for releasing human rights defenders, women's rights defenders, while at the same time they may suffer asset freezes, travel bans, an inability to leave the country. They might have to report to a police station every night. And so these are the types of things that governments will do to try and create praise for their actions, while really, if you don't dig deep, you can see that what actually has happened is it continues to be repressive, and that states should continue to document.
We'll continue now to Mr. Brunel Duceppe for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Deif. Recently, we've seen images, but also reporting and even rumors to the effect that in Afghanistan, there's a growing resorting to physical violence by the Taliban, as though the Taliban feel that they're able to attack women physically more than they were in the past. Is this your understanding?
I've also heard those kinds of, concerning reports in terms of lashings and other really abusive types of actions by the Taliban that have become, increasingly emboldened to do this.
Merci.
Thank you. Ms. O'Neill, we know that Canada has an international policy that's oriented to feminism, which is supported by most of the political parties currently in the House of Commons. Specifically, I'm taking the example of Minister Hadjan, who was on a diplomatic mission to Qatar during this World Soccer Cup. Do you think it might have been smarter to send a message about women's rights if Canada hadn't, boycotted that on the diplomatic level? And if you think it was a good idea to go, in any case, that Minister Hadjan has done a good job.
Right or wrong to go. I do know that he has expressed commitment to raising difficult issues while there.
Est-ce que vous pensez que ça va changer?
Do you think it will change anything in Qatar?
Can't say.
Okay. Non, désolé.
Unfortunate. Because we're talking about taking action and the political situation and the image we project and taking action to improve it. So, Ms. Dave, do you see any difference between the image that Canada wishes to have on the international level and the way it's actually operating on matters of women's rights?
I mean, it's a very large question. I mean, yes, certainly there is very strong messaging on a feminist foreign policy, on a rule-based international order, on prioritizing human rights. But we do see that there is often a disconnect in terms of actions on the ground, particularly with states that are considered to be allies of Canada.
Thank you. And now we'll continue our final 2-minute round with Ms. McPherson.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you to the witnesses. Very quickly, Ms. Deef, should Canada be selling weapons to Saudi Arabia? Does that align with a feminist foreign policy?
No, it doesn't. I mean, we've said repeatedly that Canada should no longer sell arms to Saudi Arabia, that there should be a total boycott given the level of humanitarian law violations committed by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen.
Thank you. And Ms. Nagarani Anderlini, what would a real feminist foreign policy, a real activated feminist foreign policy do to protect the women of Iran, the women of Saudi Arabia, the women of Ukraine, Afghanistan, all around the world?
That's a very, very big question, and I think the starting point, though, is what we're seeing right now with the Human Rights Council and the resolution that was passed yesterday for an investigation mechanism. We need to make our multilateral spaces have teeth. They need to use the strength that they have to engage nonviolently and shine the light in all of these places. And we also need to align our policies. So as my colleague said, why are we, whether it's Canada or my own country of the United Kingdom or the United States, why are we selling and supporting the war in Yemen that the Saudis are waging? They are killing children. They are killing women. Why did we do Libya? Why are we not doing an investigation into how we failed in the diplomacy on Afghanistan in Doha? Because what we did there, we are repeating elsewhere. We are stonewalling women out of these processes. So if we want to have a feminist foreign policy, and it's Canada, Germany, and other countries, it is a bit of reflecting backwards, but it's also putting some of these principles into practice. Thank you.
Thank you. And to be fair, we don't have a feminist foreign policy in Canada. We have a feminist international assistance policy, which is, as you've mentioned, some spaces, but certainly not all the spaces that it needs to be there.
And we can share with you a lot more of what your assistance, at least through us, has done. The impact is profound. So I'm incredibly grateful for the support and the trust that the Canadian government has.
Thank you to all the witnesses today for being here, for coming in person and by Zoom. We're going to continue on to our next panel. But a sincere thank you to everybody who came here, Ms. O'Neill, Ms. Daif, and Ms. Naragi Anderlini. Thank you all for being here so much. We're going to suspend for a moment while we flip to our second panel. Welcome, everyone, to this second panel on this International Day to End Violence Against Women and the study on women, in particular women in Afghanistan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, but also the rights and freedoms of women globally. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. En personne, on avait Julia.
We had Ms. Julia Petro-Trobanchet.
Also, remotely, we have Megan Doherty from Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights, the Director of Global Policy and Advocacy, and as an individual, Maître Saya Hassan. Thank you both for joining virtually. We're going to start now for 5 minutes with Maître Thériault-Provencier.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Distinguished members of the House of Commons Subcommittee on International Human Rights, I would like to begin by thanking you on behalf of Lawyers Without Borders Canada for your interest in the rights and freedoms of women and girls around the world. We are an international collaborative NGO with our 20-year history of contributing to the implementation of women's and girls' human rights by strengthening access to justice and legal representation. Many of our projects are funded by Global Affairs Canada and support the fight against gender-based violence, GBV, the promotion and protection of sexual and reproductive rights of women and girls, and the protection of human rights defenders. In the countries where we work, namely Colombia, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Mali, Benin, Burkina Faso, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, we can identify trends thanks to our experience on the ground and our work with human rights organizations involving women. These trends, despite different in context, seem to be fairly widespread. I would like to address 5 of them in the time available to me. First, discriminatory sociocultural norms, practices, and beliefs are significant barriers to women's and girls' access to justice. They often do not have access to enough legal information to know their rights and defend them. Let me give you an example. We and our partners have strengthened legal aid services in Mali, providing support that's sensitive to the realities of women and girls who are victims of gender-based violence. Ultimately, more than 3,000 people benefited from the services, and 80 women victims were represented by lawyers before national and international bodies. Shrinking civil and democratic space and rising extremism considerably affects the works of civil society organizations, which are no longer able to defend and promote the rights of women and girls. We witnessed 3 forms of such attacks on human rights defenders. First, criminalization of their activities. Second, threats and attacks on their physical integrity and lives. And third, defamation, public attacks. These all disproportionately affect women human rights defenders. Next, women and girls are, this is the third element I wish to touch on. Women and girls are excluded from decision-making, and the specificity of their experiences aren't taken into account. We found that for a peace process to be sustainable, including through the use of transitional justice, women must be involved in political, economic, and social life. They must be at the negotiating tables as provided for in the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. Fourth, we note with great concern growing disrespect for the sexual and reproductive autonomy of women and girls. We've witnessed governments attempting, and sometimes successfully, to criminalize access to abortion in all circumstances, contrary to international standards. We and our partners are actively working to protect access to sexual and reproductive health services for all, including in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, by reminding states of their international legal obligations. Finally, number 5, vulnerable and marginalized women and girls, including those with disabilities, those living in rural areas, those living in disadvantaged areas, and people of sexual or gender diversity and women belonging to minority groups are at greater risk of having their rights and freedoms violated and of experiencing gender-based violence. We have noted cases of forced sterilization, obstetric violence, and forced child marriages, early marriages, particularly targeting these groups. We cannot ignore the shadow pandemic and the rise in femicide by intimate partners or other family members recorded since the beginning of the pandemic. In light of our work to better protect the rights of women and girls, we note the importance of an international legislative framework being respected and implemented at the national level. We therefore recommend that this subcommittee use international fora to call on states that have not yet ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, including in Iran, to ratify it now and remind all parties to the convention, including Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, of their obligations under it. Also, to press these states that have ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, or those that have, including Iran and Afghanistan, to take the necessary measures to protect the rights of everyone to enjoy standards of health, including sexual and reproductive health for women and girls, and contribute more actively, including through international cooperation, to aid programs that focus on women and girls. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much, Maître Thériault-Provencher.
Those who are online, I'm going to just put up a 1 minute mark and then a 30-second mark and then lean in. Now, without further ado, if we can continue on to Ms. Doherty for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this moment, we are living through concurrent health, economic, environmental, and humanitarian crises. All of these have profound and differentiated gendered impacts, which are compounded by where women are socially, economically, and geographically located. These impacts are undeniable and include sharply rising rates of femicide and gender-based violence, inability to access or pay for essential sexual and reproductive health services, increased unpaid care work, and more precarity, lower pay, and less labor protections than men. These are not unfortunate and inevitable side effects of a world in turmoil, but an abject failure of human rights and those responsible for upholding them. What makes this current moment in history particularly dangerous for women is that at the same time as these crises, we're also witnessing rising anti-democratic sentiment within well-established democracies, an emergence of far-right and authoritarian regimes, an acceleration in the spread of disinformation, a deliberate erosion of trust in the institutions charged with upholding human rights norms and standards, and increased transnational organizing and funding among anti-human rights, white supremacist, and anti-gender equality actors. This confluence of events and actors has resulted in unprecedented intensification of attacks on rights related to sexuality, gender, and reproduction, those that defend them, and the mechanisms we use to seek protection, remedy, and accountability. This is happening online, in schools, in parliaments, in bureaucracies, in the courts, and at the United Nations. This past September, Afghan women human rights defenders addressed the UN Human Rights Council to demand that the international community act on women's complete erasure from all aspects of public life since the Taliban took over. In Saudi Arabia, women have been sent to jail for decades under the state's terrorism laws for tweeting. The recent protests in Iran, sparked by the killing of Gina Mahsa Amini, who was arrested for violating strict laws about what women can wear, is truly emblematic of the ways in which women's rights and bodies are deeply tied to the nation state. No country or region is immune, and it would be a mistake to think that violations of women's rights only happen in what we think of as repressive states. One only has to look at the recent U.S. Supreme Court decision that reversed almost 40 years of federal abortion rights protection. The question is, why do these actors target gender equality and sexual and reproductive rights? Well, gender and sexuality are deeply symbolic and culturally meaningful concepts in all societies. Anti-democratic actors understand the potency of using issues that can be culturally contentious, such as abortion, trans rights, and sex ed, to galvanize people to support them. At the heart of many of these anti-rights movements is a commitment to the perpetuation of patriarchal families and systems that are heteronormative and reproduction-oriented and can only exist through the control of women's bodies, sexuality, and gender expression. As such, the realization of sexual and reproductive rights and gender equality is a direct challenge to autocrats and populist movements who have identified and targeted these rights as threats to their purpose. Feminist sexual and reproductive rights defenders are on the front lines of attacks against human rights and democracy and face enormous risks to their lives, livelihoods, and the safeties of their families. So when we are talking about access to abortion, gender-based violence, or early and forced marriage, we are also talking about democracy, human rights, peace building, and freedom from tyranny. And when we identify state and non-state actors organizing, financing, and influencing democratic institutions to undermine bodily autonomy, women's rights, the rights of LGBTQI persons, these are clear signs that democracy is under threat. History has shown us that social justice and feminist movements have been at the forefront of strengthening human rights all over the world. Political scientists have long documented that advancement in women's rights and democracy go hand in hand, as women's political participation is a precondition for genuine democratic and egalitarian progress. To turn the tide of cascading human rights violations against women, we need the strongest possible commitment to nationally driven feminist and social justice movements in all aspects of Canada's domestic and foreign policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Doherty. And we're going to continue on to Maître Hassan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the Subcommittee on International Human Rights on the issues of rapidly diminishing rights of women and girls in Iran. This is my first time appearing before the subcommittee, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself to put in context my testimony before you today. I was born in Iran in 1980, right after the revolution and after the Islamic regime hijacked the revolution and took control of the country. When I was 7 years old, my parents decided to flee Iran because in part, they didn't want me and my younger sister to grow up under a repressive regime that had no respect for women's rights. My family and I lived in Turkey for 5 years as refugees before we were able to come to Canada when I was 13 years old. And I'm so grateful for that difficult decision my parents had to make, and so grateful for the opportunity to be living in Canada. For the last 20 years, I have been a very vocal advocate of human rights and democracy in Iran. I started my activism during my undergraduate studies at Carleton University, where my sister and I started, to the best of my knowledge, the first Iranian student association that focused on human rights in Iran. I continued my activism after becoming a lawyer through blogging, writing articles, staying in touch with activists in Iran, speaking to members of parliament, and speaking at various conferences, both nationally and internationally. Speaking out against the oppression of the Islamic regime is not a popular activity. And as a result, I have been subjected to consistent backlash from supporters of the regime, both in Iran and in Canada. Most noteworthy example was about 10 years ago when the regime's national TV put up my picture on live television. They referred to me by name and they announced that I was an enemy of the state. I continue to watch others who are also outspoken opponents of the regime face similar threats and harassment. However, I consider myself both privileged and fortunate because I live in Canada where I can speak out without the fear of being arrested, tortured, raped, and murdered for my opinions and my beliefs. Sadly, that's not the situation for millions of Iranian women and girls who have been subjected to exactly those types of treatment for the last 40 years. It is that oppression that has motivated me to speak out against the Islamic regime whenever I've had the opportunity. I want to ensure the world can and will hear the voices of millions of women and girls in Iran. For the past 2.5 months, Iranian women and girls have been able to show the entire world not only the oppression that they have been facing for the past 40 years, but also that they are ready for change, they are ready for freedom, and they're willing to risk their lives to achieve that change and that freedom. Current Iran protests, which many of us referred to as the Iran Revolution, started with the murder of one young woman, Mahsa Amini, by the regime agents because they didn't like the way she was wearing her mandatory hijab. Her murder sparked an outcry in Iran that has led to the largest protests we've seen in 40 years. What is so unique about these protests, besides the fact that they're nationwide and they've been relentless for the past 2.5 months, is the fact that they're being led by women and girls, elementary school girls taking off their mandatory hijab, taking down the picture of Khamenei in classrooms, saying no to oppression. It's incredibly humbling for me to watch these brave young women claim what is rightfully theirs, the right to choose what they wear, what they think, and how they conduct themselves. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today and try to be their voice. The Canadian government has condemned the regime's brutality in the past 2.5 months, and they've taken limited steps to sanction the Iran Revolutionary Corps under the Immigration Act. These are very positive first steps. But there's so much more Canada can do, including listing the entirety of the Iran Revolutionary Corps as a terrorist organization under the Criminal Code. I'm hopeful that the Canadian government will take the concrete, meaningful steps to help these brave women and girls achieve their goals of freedom and equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to continue on to Mr. Versen for 5 minutes. Mr. Versen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being there. Ms. Hassan, your testimony around your harassment that has happened here in Canada, could you explain a little bit more what that looks like?
Yes, and it goes back from really when I started 20 years ago, because at that time especially was not very popular. And a lot of the harassment that I've experienced, it's been online, which is one of the reasons that I'm no longer online. I have very limited social media presence because it's very easy, I find, for people to attack individuals who are active online. I've had situations where I've gone to protests and I've been followed. I've gone to events in community centers and I've been followed by men in the back of the community center. Until I was able to, get inside or get to a public transportation. I've attended protests with my husband at night, where when the protest was finished and we were going into the parking lot to get our cars, there were men following us. My husband recently received a threat online telling him that if he's an activist as well, telling him that if he continues what he's doing, that they're going to come after him. So the threats are not limited to women, men as well. I think the Iranian Canadian community has been very vocal about the fact that there are Islamic regime elements that are in Canada who are threatening and harassing activists who are outspoken about the situation in Iran.
Would you say that this is connected back to the Iranian government, or is it local actors on their own?
Oh, I would certainly say that it's connected to the regime. There's a very systematic way that the Islamic regime has been harassing and threatening activists, people that are vocal against the regime in Canada and in other countries as well. In the U.S., there have been threats of people being kidnapped. They haven't been kidnapped, but there were reports of very outspoken activists who were going to be kidnapped, and that was stopped. It's something that's very common, and it's the regime elements that are in Canada who are trying to stop activists like myself and many others from speaking out.
Mm-hmm. It's very concerning that this is happening right here in Canada. Is there something that Canadian government can do to ensure that that you feel safe, essentially, in Canada here alone? Never mind what's going on in Iran.
I think part of that is Canada sadly has been a safe haven for Islamic regime and support the people that support the regime. So they've come here for many years, they brought their investments and they've felt very safe and secure here. The government hasn't taken any steps to ensure that the Iranian Canadian community is protected. I think it's great that we're having this conversation right now. This is really, I think, one of the few times that I've been able to raise this issue and feel like it is being listened to, and I think this is a very positive step. But the Canadian government, I think, needs to ensure that the regime elements and regime sympathizers do not feel that Canada is a safe haven for them, that they can just come here, bring their money, and do whatever they want to do in terms of threatening and harassing Iranian Canadian activists and get away with it.
Folks' connections to the IRGC, is that something that's fairly able to identify fairly easily, or is it it takes a little bit to prove that?
In 50 seconds.
The connection. Well, I think this is something that the government will need to do along with CSIS. It's not for me to identify who are the Revolutionary Guards and their sympathizers that are here, but I do know that a lot of them are here and they have assets, not necessarily under their own names, but their families, which is another concern. I think the government needs to look not specifically just at the names of certain particular Revolutionary Guard individuals, but also their families and associates who are also here and who have the assets of those individuals.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now we'll go to Mr. Sidhu for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for taking time to join us here today. Women's rights are human rights, and they are at the heart of our foreign policy. We heard from a lot of testimony about our international feminist foreign policy today, and completely agree with what the well-intentioned mandate from Minister Joly is in terms of international feminist foreign policy on the world stage. So a few questions in terms of our international feminist foreign policy approach, and want to hear some of your thoughts on what you think and provide some insights on that. I know Global Affairs has committed 15% of its bilateral international development assistance across all action areas to implementing initiatives dedicated to advancing gender equality and improving women and girls' quality of life. As I just said, Minister Joly, part of her mandate letter, was asked to continue developing and implementing Canada's feminist foreign policy with the support of partner organization. My question is, how can the international community help promote and protect women and girls' human rights, gender equality, and empowerment of women and girls in fragile conflict and post-conflict settings? It's open to any of the witnesses that would like to.
Well, thank you. I can start. I think one of the first things that I would say to that is that the international community, particularly global North states, there must be stop perpetuating this false divide between development and human rights, between civil and political rights on the one hand, and economic, social, and cultural rights on the other hand. The fundamental principles of human rights demand that we understand that all human rights are interdependent and indivisible, so we cannot enjoy one set of rights without the other. And so looking specifically at the context of fragile states and in humanitarian settings, I think that we have to look at women's rights and particularly in my area of expertise, sexual and reproductive rights, they can't only be relegated to development assistance or, special conferences that only focus on women. And then they're conveniently left out when we're talking about trade deals or debt financing or arms sales or pandemic response. Those, when we're doing you cannot separate out those things because we see how they are interconnected. So they must be part and parcel, and we must be looking at the civil and political aspects as well as the economic, social, and cultural rights aspects.
Thank you, Ms. Doherty. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to.
Oui, si je peux également rajouter. Yes, if I may add something, it would be in French, of course. When it comes to post-conflict areas, often the legal system will be very fragile. So we need to invest in legal systems, in lawyer training, in jurist training to ensure that justice is available to all. In doing so, we must ensure that we keep a gender-based analysis approach so that women, especially those who have been subjected to gender-based violence, have information about the legal system, have access to legal assistance, especially in remote and fragile areas. We mustn't forget that we must include the voices of survivors, of those who have been victimized, when we try to reconstruct, to once again give teeth to a legal system.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left?
1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay. Well, I'll quickly get to my question. How you mentioned some of the initiatives that we can take, but how can the international community increase the meaningful participation of women, women's organizations, and networks in conflict prevention, and conflict resolution, and post-conflict state building? I have less than a minute, but I'm hoping to get a little bit of insights from you.
I can start, and maybe to say that the intervention should happen before conflict starts. While I appreciate that there's people who have much more expertise in post-conflict peace building, my area of expertise is really looking at what are the things that we can do to intervene before we get to that crisis point. And the human rights framework, as part of the international community, provides an excellent foundation that all states should be looking at when they're looking either through their development assistance programs, their trade negotiations, the climate justice negotiations, about a human rights-based approach to addressing the situations in countries that are of immediate concern. And I would draw as an example the Office of the High Commissioner's groundbreaking work on a human rights-based approach to maternal mortality and morbidity as an excellent example of these are some of the things that we can do to prevent those conflicts in the first place.
Thank you, Ms. Doherty. And now on va continuer avec Monsieur Bernard Duceppe.
With Mr. Duceppe. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being with us today to help us carry out this very important study on the role that Canada needs to play here. Ms. Tétrault-Provencher, the study we're carrying out is about the rights and freedoms of women everywhere in the world, and on women in Afghanistan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Considering what's going on in our southern neighbors' land, anti-abortion approaches that are moving forward, the Supreme Court's decisions in Roe versus Wade, even Canadian MPs applauded this when this ruling came down from the Supreme Court in the United States. So seeing that there are some Canadian politicians who are quite happy to applaud the loss of sexual reproductive rights in the United States, what does that tell us about the rest of the world? Thank you for your question. The United States, well, we're seeing a trend at work there regarding access to abortion, threats to that right in Honduras as well. There's been a constitutional change recently in this regard. And, of course, in the United States, we see it. El Salvador as well. So wherever one is, this is a growing trend. It's a danger everywhere, threatening women everywhere. So we really have to apply ourselves to this. We need to talk about it. We need to fight back. We need to keep it in the news. And I think all elected officials should condemn this. It would give a sort of a pretext to other countries saying, look, well, it's people in the United States are doing this, and in Canada it's being applauded. If that's the case, then, of course, we can adopt anti-abortion legislation. I mean, we're just chatting. You're more of an expert than I am. But, yes, we need a pretext to create a coalition of countries who will stand up and saying this must not be done, to fight against the nibbling away at human rights. There's, of course, a covenant in this regard on women's human rights. You mentioned access to legal services during and after conflict periods. Can you tell us more about survival and survivors' access to justice? We're working in countries that aren't necessarily in direct conflict, though the situation may be dire. As for recourse to justice and compensation, very difficult for women and victims to have any compensation, especially for sexual violence. They're stigmatized. They don't have access to the system. The system is not something they're trust. They're often abandoned by family members. It's extremely difficult for them to use the legal system or to be compensated, or they're minors. And finally, there's very little that's offered to them. Even if they do try to use the system, there's no follow-up. There are many places where compensation is just really not a factor, never offered. We know that sexual assault is often used as a weapon of war. We do know as well that some regimes actually wish to directly attack women's reproductive and health rights. Even in China right now, there is information to the effect that Uyghur women are being sterilized against their will. Now, you are an attorney. Is this align with genocide when you want to keep women from enjoying their own reproductive rights? Isn't this extermination of an entire population? Is that how we could classify it? Genocide is defined in international law. Situations need to be carefully evaluated to see whether and as of which point they are genocide. But the idea is to intervene early when we see red flags. These are the sorts of things to take into account. We need to avoid this, stand up against this, and then genocide, of course, is an international law concept. I'm out of time? Yes, unfortunately, you are. We will wind up with Ms. Pearson for 5 minutes.
I want to thank all of our witnesses today. My goodness, I'm in my office alone in Edmonton. It's quite early here, and I was wanting to yell out yes to so much of the testimony. I also want to just acknowledge particularly Ms. Hassan for the frontline role that you are playing, standing up for women's rights in Iran. I know that, hearing what is happening in Canada and how that reach is happening in Canada, I compliment you on your bravery, and I'm so sorry that you are having to face the things that you're having to face.
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask a quick question. I mean, Miss Doherty, honestly, when you compare your comment comparing democracy and women's rights, like when we lose women's rights, we lose democracy, we lose so much of our capacity. I think that's something that's very, very important to recognize. And one thing I do want to push back a little bit on some of the previous testimony about is that we do not have a feminist foreign policy in Canada. That has not been implemented. We have a feminist international assistance policy, which is fantastic, which I helped develop, but we don't have a feminist foreign policy, which means, as you point out, Ms. Doherty, trade, defense, all of these things where we need to have that feminist lens, we do not. So I want to make this very, very clear for this testimony. Ms. Doherty, what are the direct impacts on women when we don't use that lens, when we don't have a feminist foreign policy lens on things like trade and defense?
Thank you very much for the question. So I would take, for example, in the context of trade, we know that women are the lowest paid, they have the most precarious working conditions, they are the most subject to exploitation. And when we are talking about trade deals that are being made without taking into consideration the labor consideration and protections of women in particular countries or regions, you are exacerbating women's women's lives, their health, their security, and the security of their families. I would take also the example of when we're talking about international financial institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, when they are going in to look at debt refinancing and with a policy of austerity measures, we know that women are the most impacted by austerity measures in terms of health and social services. And unless those things are being taken into account and you are recognizing what a harmful impact those policies can have on women, it undermines a lot of the other work that Canada and other countries are trying to do in order to enhance women's rights. So, you have to have a coherence across these range of foreign policy areas if you are serious about advocating and promoting the rights of women. It does not make any sense to only do it in one area and undermine it in another area. And a cohesive policy is necessary to make that happen.
Well, and one of the things that I'm quite worried about is even with our feminist international assistance policy, the words are there, the words are strong, except we're not seeing the adequate funding for that in place. So, for example, during an access to information request that I did, I found out that the Canadian government's funding for SRHR has not all been spent. I mean, clearly it could be. There is so much work to be done around the world, but those dollars have not gone out. Can you talk specifically about access to sexual and reproductive health? What are the impacts on women when we don't do our part, when we don't stand up for the rights of women around the world? What are the direct impacts on women and girls?
Thank you again for the question. And again, yes, Canada has made a huge commitment of $700 million for sexual and reproductive health and rights over the next 10 years, 500 of which should be allocated towards the neglected areas of abortion, contraception, adolescent sexual and reproductive health, and advocacy for SRHR. And the impact of not supporting the organizations, the feminist movements that are doing the hard work every single day to ensure that people have access to the services, the information that they need, they die. I mean, that's the most immediate one. We know the rates of maternal mortality around the world are skyrocketing and have gone, sorry, I should rephrase that. They are very high, and around 300,000 women a year die, and the numbers are potentially increasing because of the pandemic. When we have restrictions on access to abortion, we see that women will seek out unsafe means if necessary, if there is no legal means. They suffer severe health and long-term disability in the context of unsafe abortion.
On that note, we're going to have to conclude. We're very tight on time, and we have to unfortunately be tight also in this round. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here. Madame Tétrault-Provencher, merci d'être ici.
Thank you, Ms. Tétrault-Provencher, for having joined us.
Hassan and Ms. Doherty for joining us online. To all witnesses, sincere thank you. And we're going to now go to closed session. Those online, please flip quickly to closed session so we can conclude by 45 our committee business. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.